All right, as you can see, I'm back out riding my bike again, my custom steel all-road bike, and that's because I have now returned the custom gravel racing bike back to John Fitzgerald, the frame builder, the owner of the bike. And the day I dropped it off, I met up with a good friend of mine, another cyclist who was very curious to give that bike a test ride. So we went out for a short 30-40 mile ride, mixed terrain. We did a little bit of off-road, a little bit of on-road. And we brought both of these bikes. We brought the bike I'm riding today, and we brought the gravel racing bike. And he was very curious to give it a test ride himself. He's been riding some other bikes, some similar, some different, and he's in the range of looking for something to fill in for a bike that he's well, I don't know what he's I can't speak for him. So he was just interested in testing it out. So we went out, and what was good about that ride is I was able to ride this bike again and ride that bike, and we switched back and forth. He's a little taller than me. He's, I think, 6'2", and so he's about 2 inches taller. I'm 6 foot, and so we had to swap saddles and seat posts in order to do that. But we did that during the ride. We actually switched out our seat posts and we switched bikes, so we could ride them back to back, and it was a really interesting experience. So the bike is now back to John, and I was really sad to see it go. I know some of you asked, why didn't I buy the bike, or was I going to buy the bike? And the answer is no, I wasn't originally planning to buy that bike, because John specifically built it to allow his customers a chance to test ride a few different bikes. So he wanted something that was on the kind of high trail end, and he has a couple bikes that are on the low trail side. He has disc brake bikes, he has rim brake bikes. So this way he can have, if a customer is interested and they wanted to go on a test ride and kind of get an idea of maybe they're new to the whole low trail thing, they want to test it out. He's got these bikes now that you can try them out. So the plan was never for me to buy that bike, specifically that bike. It was more for me to test it out and just see if there's anything about that bike that I might want to incorporate into my next custom build. Now, we're going to talk about that in another video. Today, what we're going to do is we're going to do a little Q&A, and I was planning to do this earlier. It's been over a week now since I've dropped the bike off, unfortunately. And I wanted to do it right away while it was fresh in my mind, and I actually filmed an entire Q&A session, but I just wasn't really happy with the way I was answering those questions, because for one, I wanted to get back on my bike for a little bit more, kind of ride it some and see, am I giving a really as honest and objective answer as I possibly can. Now, this whole video series is really just for entertainment first and foremost. I make all my videos for entertainment purposes, but it's also just for, giving people some ideas on things they can, maybe they want to build a custom bike, and, it's some things to think about. I'm not saying that what I do, everyone should follow suit. I'm very much, I've been bike riding for a while, and now I'm kind of trying to experiment with different things. I have a titanium road bike, I have a carbon fiber road bike, I have an aluminum hardtail mountain bike with disc brakes, and I've ridden lots of bikes over the years. I've had older 80s touring bikes, I've had even vintage road bikes that are almost touring bikes, really. So I'm into the whole experimenting now. For me, when I first got into cycling, it was all about what is the lightest, fastest possible bike that I can get. And that was fun for a while, and I enjoyed doing that. And I did a couple of years, I did some actual road racing, and it was fun. And then I got into the kind of, mixed terrain racing, did some of the grasshoppers. That opened my eyes to some other ideas on bikes, then bike touring, bike packing. So there's just a lot of stuff you can do with bikes. It keeps it interesting. And the longer you ride, the more you want to just experiment and try stuff out. So anyway, today what I do is a quick, well, it might not be quick. I'm not good at quick, so I do apologize. If you're one of those people that likes the quick, compact videos, then unfortunately this is probably not the one for you. So I'm going to try to answer some of these questions here as best I can. I grabbed a few from the last video. They were really good. And the one that really threw me off, and the reason why this video is now going to be, you know, over a week past when I dropped the bike off, is because of Robert Ehrenbeck's question. And so he asked a good question, and I needed some time to think about it. And when I answered the first time around, I had to delete it all because I went back and watched it, and I was like, you know, it's not coming across really the way I feel about it. So let me try it again today and see what happens. So his question is, he goes into some things about different tube sizes, and we'll get into that later in the video about what is standard and oversized. There was another question on that, and I'll come back to it. But basically, he says, would you rank your current bike higher if only it didn't shimmy? Or let me start over. Hold on. Would you rank your current bike higher if it only didn't have that susceptibility to shimmy? Question mark. But if everything else were equal, would you still prefer the mid-trail geometry over low trail? I would think that running wide tires on a mid-trail bike would make the steering more sluggish. Okay, so there's quite a bit in that question. And first of all, I know when I said, you know, if I were to choose, which bike would I choose? What I was kind of thinking at that time is, which tube set would I choose, and like what steering would I choose? But there's a lot of things. I think it kind of left the impression that I don't like my bike. But the reality is, I love this bike, and probably the question here is difficult to answer simply because it's sort of phrasing it as though, you know, you can only have one or the other. And I sort of did that to myself when I made that video. I sort of set it up that way. And so if I only had one bike, I guess let's start with that. If I only had one bike, would I pick that other bike for its higher trail and stiffer tube over this bike? And I think if I were to have one bike, I would say yes. I would probably prefer that mid-trail. It's right around 60, and it had a little bit stiffer frame, so it could be more versatile, I guess. That would be why I would want to go that route. The downside of that bike is that the higher trail leaves less room for fenders, and so you're stuck without fenders, and you'd probably not enjoy the benefits of being able to load the front of the bike instead of the back of the bike. I know mid-trail bikes probably are good with a balanced load, so a little bit on the back, a little bit on the front. So that could work. But I think in general, like if I were to have one bike, I'd probably go that route. Now since I have this bike and I wanted this bike, I wanted the low trail, full fender, 650B, all-road bike. And this bike has more road geometry. You know, it has a little bit more of a saddle. The handlebar drop, it feels a little more like my road bike. It doesn't have any toe overlap. And it has this nice kind of flexible, really curved, flexible fork. It's set up with all the features. It's got the headlight and the dynamo hub, and it's got the rack in the bag, and everything is made around that concept. And so I really like having this bike. I like having it ready to go. When I want to do that kind of a ride, it's there. I've got the fenders if it's wet out. There's no water spraying on me. So for what it is, this is what I wanted. I wanted to have a bike like this. So I don't want to go back to a one bike does it all type of mindset. That was just a kind of a thought I was having at the time when I filmed that video. Which one would I pick if I had to choose? So good news is I don't have to choose, and that's why I'm gonna have this bike. Now I do want a slightly different bike, and I don't want it to overlap with this one. I want it to be a different bike. So we're gonna be talking about that later in a future video series, perhaps down the road when I get to it. But I do want to build another custom bike, and it's gonna be different than this one. I'm not gonna try to, you know, just fine tune what this is. I wanna go completely different. I wanna have this bike for what it is, and then a different bike for what that does. So anyway, it was a really good question, and it was really hard for me to answer, and I don't even know if I've still answered it as well as I want, but at some point I just have to let this one go and get it out there. So let's make sure I answered all of it. Does the mid-trail create sluggish steering? You know, I didn't feel like the steering was sluggish. I felt like it was slower, meaning it wouldn't, you know, it didn't take, it took more input to steer, but it didn't feel slower. It felt actually very stable. And for me, I guess maybe I'm just used to it because I've come from riding a lot of mid-trail road bikes and even higher trail bikes, like the hardtail mountain bike. So maybe for me, it's just something I'm used to. And if you're coming from a different side, maybe you've come from more vintage bikes, like the higher trail might feel sluggish to you. But I certainly am not. I think if I were to have a preference, if I could have no toe overlap and have the nice curvy fork and everything and still have a higher trail, I would probably go that route. The lower trail has its advantages for carrying a front load, really, and for me, that's the only real big benefit, other than toe overlap and all the other things, that you can't really achieve with a higher trail. Then that's what it is. So it's kind of a, it is what it is sort of thing, and I hate to use that cliche statement, but I feel like that's what it amounts to on a bike like this. And I don't hate it. I just think it's different, and for me, it's not as easy to ride a bike like this. It's not as good for me on like loose terrain and rocky terrain, where I feel like that front end just gets moved around to me. So anyway, let's move on. Next question. Thanks, Robert, by the way. That was a good question, and that one got me. So congratulations. Okay, so Michael MacArthur says, great video. I am hoping you'll clarify a few terms in this video series. When you say oversize, when you say oversize, I take it to mean 1.1" top tube and 1.25" down tube, whereas the standard tube specs means 1 inch top tube and 1 1/8" down tube. Is that correct? I know this is a mouthful to say during the videos, so it might be good details for the show notes. Yeah, that's kind of how I see it too, Michael. I think a standard top tube, at least in my definition for this video series, and I could be wrong compared to other frame builders. I'm not a frame builder, so I can't speak for what terminology the frame builders would use. But for me and for what I've meant in this video, top tube standard diameter is 1 inch or 25.4 millimeters. Oversized top tube is 1.1" or 28.6 millimeters. Then if we jump to the down tube, a standard down tube is 1.1", which is 28.6 millimeters. And then an oversized down tube is 31.8 or 31.6 or 31.8, whatever the 1.25" is in metric. That's how I've thought of it. Now, I've seen frames with even oversized top tubes that are 28.6, or they're 31.6 or 31.8. Anyway, I think it's 31.8. So yes, I think I've seen tubes even bigger than these, and they're really just a lot stiffer. So that's called double oversize. That I don't know. But for this series, that's what I meant. But so thank you, and I'm glad we were able to clarify that, Michael. Hope I clarified it. But it sounds like you and I are on the same page. All right. So Philip Smith, they're all lovely bikes. Why don't you buy it? As you so rightly say, you can never have too many. Thanks for the insights into both the handling of the bikes and the passion for cycles. Oh, thanks, Philip. So yeah, like I said in the beginning, this bike was really for John and his customers to be able to test ride. I think he built the frame kind of in that sort of medium size range for just to be able to be ridden by a larger range of people for him and his customers. So, if I were to do a bike like that, which we'll talk about in some future videos, but we're going to go really specific on geometry, and so that's why that's one of the benefits of custom, is that you get to pick every little thing you could ever want to pick. And so that's why that frame is beautiful, and there's a lot I like about it, and it's pretty close to what I'm looking at, but because it isn't exactly what I want it to look like or to do exactly, I'm gonna pick something that's just a little more fine-tuned for me riding it. So otherwise, somebody out there who's maybe it's probably fit perfect for them, or I don't know. That's not what the intent of that bike was for, and so I'm not going to buy it. But it's a great bike, no question. Okay, so Nick Cusick, pardon me if I mispronounced that. He's asking, anything notable about straight versus curved forks? That's a good question, Nick. I think there is something notable. Well, first of all, the offsets are different, or the fork rake, as some people call it, is different. And what I did notice about it, and this could come down to a number of factors. So, these are I'm just going to speak in general terms here, because a lot of this can vary depending on tire size and fork, head tube angles and stuff. So So from what I could kind of tell from the difference between just a straight blade fork and a curved fork was, one, I noticed difference in the flex. So mine is way more flexible. It has, you can feel it laterally and you can really feel it a lot vertically. That bike felt a lot stiffer and more kind of stable on the front end. When I'd go into turns and stuff and it would hit a little rock or something, or it didn't get flexed as much. So that is good for handling. Also on a downhill too. Downhill cornering, it felt like it was really stable. My bike feels like it gives a little bit in the corners. A little bit of those G forces as you're going through causes that fork to flex more, and so it changes the feel of the steer or the corner a little bit. But that straight blade fork feels like it holds itself stiffer. It's a stiffer fork, and so it holds holds itself in the same spot better. So that's really good for handling. Not as good for maybe that comfort, that long day in the saddle flex. It may not be as good for that. And unfortunately, the biggest ride I did was like 65 or so, or 70 miles. I think maybe one day I did a 70-mile ride. And so, it's not that 100+ mile distance where all those things start to really show up and give you those benefits. So I didn't get it to there, but for what I did with it, it was great. I really like that kind of handling for those kind of rides. I think if I were to do like a really long gravel ride or a really long road ride, I'd still prefer a little more give on the front end, just for long distance comfort. So it's more of a kind of performance oriented bike. Could it be good for a long day? I mean, it's still more flexible than probably a lot of carbon forks that are out there, but it's not as flexible as this particular fork I have on this bike. So I hope that answers your question. And I know that was a little convoluted, but it's just really hard to describe some of these differences. They're very subtle, and sometimes it can be hard to really say that this is how it felt when, it's like sometimes you go, well, it's good. Like it is like this, but it's not really. So the differences are minor, so it's hard to really pin it down. So I do apologize, but there are subtle differences. Okay, so the next question here comes in from Podrugi-Stroni. Sorry if I'm not pronouncing that correctly, but anyways, I'm not good at pronouncing people's names, by the way. If you haven't noticed, wish you had mentioned 700C wheels. Could you live with them? Is the 650B an obvious requirement? Ooh, that's a good question. Is the 650B a requirement? I would say no. There's no requirement that you need to have a 650B wheel, whether it's for a randoneering bike or for a road racing bike. I don't think there's a requirement, especially not in the rules of any sort of event that I know of. But 650B, the benefits of 650B, and there's a lot of videos out there that talk about the benefits and the pros and the cons, both on the 650B and the 27.5 side of it. So the 27.5 is kind of nomenclature for the mountain biking people, and the 650B is sort of like nomenclature for the randoneering road biking terminology. So the fact is there's no requirements, but what I would say is for a bike like the one I have here today, the one I'm riding, it makes the smaller wheel is good for a couple of things. It allows you to have fenders, it allows you to have big tires and still have a frame with geometry that is more proportionate to a road bike. So instead of stretching it out like a mountain bike might need to do to run bigger tires, the bike can be maintained in sort of those tighter kind of road bike frame geometries. I really think that's the benefit of it. I don't know if there's any kind of speed benefits. Really, I can't pick up on any of those kind of things. Does it handle better off-road with bigger wheels? I mean, it kind of feels like it does a little to a certain degree, but there are people out there that say it doesn't, and they've run tests and proven that it's not. So I wouldn't say that there's much of a difference in that sense, but really what it comes down to is it rolls and feels like a road bike, but it has the wider tire to give you more comfort. So it has sort of like a road bike feel with the nice wide tire. And you can fit the fenders, and you don't have the toe overlap, and you have really just a standard kind of set of frame geometry numbers that fit like a road bike. So I think that's really the kind of driving force behind the 650B wheel size. But that's a good question, and thank you for asking. Tom Order. This is an interesting name. Let me see if I pronounce this. Is this Tom Order? Tom Order asks a couple of questions. One, did you notice any difference in fork compliance between the bent forks and straight fork? I noticed a little bit. I feel like the straight blade fork is just a little stiffer. Could be that it has thicker steel. John mentioned it was still a fairly thin fork blade as far as, because it's a rim brake bike, so it didn't need that extra thickness to strengthen it. So it was still a flexible fork, but it did feel like it would hold its shape a little bit better. It didn't flex as much. And as I already mentioned, that was really good for cornering and handling, especially off-road. Down hills and corners and curves, it handles really well, holds itself together well. It doesn't seem to flex in a turn where you get those forces on the fork. It held its shape really nicely. But then again, that can be a trade-off as far as losing a little bit of that front give. But with the really wide tires, most of your suspension is coming from the tires anyway. So I feel like it's a good riding fork. It was a good riding bike. Number 2, how did you like the index shifting? Well, I've used index shifting I have index shifting on a couple of other bikes. I use it on my road bikes have index shifting, and I have index shifting on a mountain bike. So, I'm pretty familiar with it. I like it. I think it's great that it's right there. You don't have to pull your hand off the handlebars. You can just, if you're climbing and you need to shift, it's good for that. The one by was interesting because you just deal with the rear derailleur, so there was no extra stuff going on in the front. You never had to worry about like dropping the chain or having to shift into the smaller ring and to get that right combination. It was just keep hitting that one button and eventually you'll find a gear you like. So that was nice. And yeah, for a racing kind of a bike, a gravel racing bike or a mountain bike, something like that, I think it's really cool. For a road bike that does a lot of road riding, I think you'd probably be better with a double, simply because you can pick your chain line, which is, for a road ride, you're looking for that nice smooth sound and that smooth feel because you're on a smooth road, and so like that stuff starts to matter more. Whereas off-road, you're just trying to find a good gear to do a steep climb, and then you're going to be bombing down a hill, so you need to shift it a little more. And also the clutch on that derailleur was neat. It did keep the chain nice and tight. It didn't bounce around much when I was descending on things. It was quiet, especially descending on loose dirt, loose gravel and stuff, when you get that chain slap. It was nice and quiet, so I did like all that stuff. I think it was pretty cool. So yeah, I don't know if I'd go one by personally. I think it's because most of the riding I do, and especially on a bike like that, I would just stick to 2 by. I know I am kind of contradicting what I said just a second ago, but I think my riding style of being kind of like 50-50, sometimes 50% on-road, 50% off-road on the same rides, just lends itself to just sticking to the double and having those extra, gear combinations and then being able to pick my chain line. For me, I just like it. I probably won't go with the one by. I don't really like, one thing I didn't like was that gigantic cassette on the back. I mean, it just, there's nothing wrong with that per se, but it just, to me, looks just balanced. Something about that balance doesn't look right, but that's aesthetics. There's my aesthetic preferences are, more kind of traditional, but it was good and I enjoyed riding it for the time that I had it. Let's see. Oh, and the Sram one by, I will say a couple of things more. Let me just keep going on that. One thing I did not like is the Sram shifting is a little unusual. Sometimes what would happen is I would shift up. You have to push it twice to go up and then once to go down. So I would get it all the way up to the top gear, and I'm going up a steep climb, and I'm thinking, okay, there's got to be another gear because it's getting steep. So I go to push it to try to get another gear, but I've already run out of gears, and it would shift down one. So it made it even harder, and I had to shift it back up. And it was like, oh man, I wish I wouldn't have done that because it was already hard enough to go up that hill, and now I just made it even harder. So that was one thing that was kind of annoying, is the way that SRAM does the double shift, double click to shift. So I don't know if I would go SRAM on the shifting. I'd probably stick with Shimano. So anyway, Felix Jackson. One thing you didn't mention is bar stem combo. Recently built steel Columbus SL Seoc with Campy record 11 speed. First used Chinelli bars and stem as a threaded head tube, Then switched to FSA very light alloy stem, same stem length and compact bars using stem adapter. Very different ride. Yeah, so there's a little bit more to this, but I think I get where he's going. He's saying he didn't talk about how the stem and the bar affected the feel of the bike. And you know, this bike has a coil stem and 25.4 diameter clamp style handlebars, so small diameter bars. And it's all really flexible. You know, when you push on it, you can feel it flex, you can see it flex. Whereas when you jump up to the 1.125" clamp style stems and then the 31.6, 31.8 bar handlebars diameters, like they become a little bit stiffer. Some of them just taper down to keep them flexible. You know, so there's a ton of different handlebar styles out there, and they all have different flex characteristics. And so I didn't talk about that because, well, it's just a lot of things to keep track of when you're talking about these things. But I will say that that bike did feel like in medium stiffness, I would say, like maybe similar to what this is feeling like right now. Maybe this one's a little bit more flexible because of the coil stem, but that one felt okay. You know, it had the SimWorks bars that do the large diameter clamp at the stem, but then they taper down really quickly to, you know, your kind of skinnier tube handlebars. So they were flexible, and they seemed to feel pretty good actually. So there was no complaints for me, but then again, my longest ride was 70 miles, so I didn't get a chance to really put it to the test on the long distance stuff. Okay, wow, that is it. I don't know how long this video is going to be, but my guess is it's going to be a long one. So that's going to cover it for this video series. I hope this was interesting and informative, and hopefully it inspired some of you to go out and consider getting a custom steel bike, custom titanium bike, even a custom carbon bike, I guess, if that's what you want. And otherwise, let's see. That should conclude this series. There will be some more stuff, as I mentioned. We're going to be coming back on some more custom stuff in the future. We're not done yet. There's always more custom steel to talk about. And yeah, so if you guys have any more comments or thoughts about this, please feel free to leave them in the comments section below, as all the YouTubers like to say. But anyway, yeah, it's been a lot of fun and I enjoyed it. Thank you very much to John for letting me take your bike and put it through the paces, and had a great time, and I am looking forward to doing some more projects with you in the future. So thank you all. Have a nice day.